What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to take another look at the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 and go over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in late 2023. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, despite originally going for around $500 factory unlocked, these days it definitely is quite a bit more affordable, and despite being a bit older now, it does still have quite a bit to offer. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 395, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a great display here all around. Despite having an IPS LCD and not like an AMOLED or an OLED or anything like that, the display is still decently bright. The viewing angles are maybe not the best, but they are okay for most settings. And in general, things do look really good. The 1080p resolution does give us a real nice sharp image, so if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, you will get a great experience here. And with the 120Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium to use. And then when it comes to size and dimensions, it is great there as well. In fact, at 6.8 inches, with again a 20.5:9 aspect ratio, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is actually even a bit better than the successor. Now, I did do a full comparison between the two on the channel, so definitely check that out too. But overall, my point is, the display here was not only really good when it originally came out, but even now compared to other mid-range phones like it still definitely is among the better options. Now, that being said, I will point out, at 6.8 inches, this is definitely not a small phone, and despite being pretty comfortable to hold overall, for some people it might be a little bit too much, especially if you're maybe using a case. I could see where for some people, depending on your preferences, it could be a little bit too bulky. So if you are someone who typically prefers a more compact device, then this phone might not be for you. But in general, I feel like for the average user, having such a large display, especially when combined with the image quality, definitely is a net benefit. Now for storage, with this phone, we are getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but the big caveat here is this phone in my hand is factory unlocked, and if you get this phone through a carrier, you're most likely only going to get 128. So if you are someone who wants a ton of storage, and you are considering this phone, then again, keep in mind to get 256GB. As far as I know, the only version that's like this is factory unlocked, so yeah, definitely keep that in mind. But at the same time, even 128 at this point in 2023, that is a pretty decent amount of storage too. And for the average user, you're probably not going to need more. So either way, if storage is more important to you, then this phone will be a great choice. And again, it also does support microSD card expansion too. So if you have maybe lots of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card, and this will make a difference. For security features, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we are getting Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely a great spot for a fingerprint scanner, and I'm glad to see that we're getting both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock. While this isn't rare per se, the flexibility is always nice. But real quick, let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, up front, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, keep in mind, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. So in general, for what it is, I do think this phone has a pretty good camera setup. I am glad to see we're getting both an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. And when it comes to this phone specifically, and the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 I guess, it is kind of cool they combine the ultra wide camera and the macro camera. Even at this point in late 2023, Motorola is really the only one I've seen do that. Not that it really makes a huge difference, but all the same kind of cool. But yeah, great features here. And when it comes to photo quality, despite maybe not being the best camera out there, I do think the photo quality we get with this phone is pretty good. So for the average user, if you're taking maybe Instagram photos, sending things to friends and family, or maybe using Snapchat or something like that, it will definitely get the job done. But if you're coming from maybe an older but higher end device and you're expecting flagship level photo quality, then keep in mind, being a mid-range phone, that's not going to be this phone. So if you are in that kind of situation where you're really taking all kinds of pictures and you're expecting professional quality, and maybe your expectations are just a bit higher in general, then you might be disappointed here, but I feel like that's probably not most people, so for the average user, I would say the camera quality here will be plenty good enough. Now to give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. And overall, I do think the photo quality here again is pretty good for what it is. Maybe not the best, especially when it comes to like the color richness. On one hand, if you want things to look a bit more natural, then I guess it could be a good thing, but when compared to something like Samsung, for example, the colors from something like a Samsung tend to be a bit more rich and vibrant, whereas they're a little bit more dull with this phone, but overall these are really nitpicky things. In general, I do think this camera is great for what it is, so if you are someone looking for an affordable 5G phone with plenty of features, and you want to make sure you have good photo quality too, you won't be disappointed with this phone. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor, so definitely a great processor here. I have seen it being used in lots of phones, even more recent ones for that matter. So in general, despite not being nearly as good as like the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor in the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, this phone still does hold its own, and for the average user for more basic daily activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some light mobile gaming. For stuff like that, you're really not going to need anything faster. So if that's really all you're going to be doing, then I do think this phone will be perfectly fine. But if you are someone who spends a lot of time on your phone, and maybe you're doing more demanding activities like high performance mobile gaming and stuff like that, then in that case I could see wanting something a bit faster. But honestly, at the end of the day, despite what some people might think, you really don't need a $1,000 flagship phone to get decent performance, because most people are really only doing basic daily activities anyway. And again, for that kind of use, the performance we're getting here will be plenty good enough. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance wise compared to your current device, because of course depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not be an upgrade. If you're coming from an older but higher end device like, say, a Samsung Galaxy S10 for example, then this will be a bit of a downgrade, but if you're coming from a lower end device, then it probably will be a solid upgrade. But again, in my experience, this phone will be plenty fast enough for normal daily activities, so if you are looking for a more affordable 5G phone like this, as long as you don't have super high expectations, I do think most people will be happy with it. Now for the battery, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery that also supports 15W fast charging. Now for the charging speed, keep in mind this is really not great. On one hand, it's not terrible, but compared to counterparts like this, like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G was probably the most comparable Samsung to this, and that phone had 25W fast charging, whereas again this one only has 15. Now, fast charging is probably not going to matter for everyone, but if you are expecting really fast charging speed, then keep in mind, even with a 15W fast charger, it's not the best on this phone. But at the same time, if you're someone who typically has your phone plugged in for a good chunk of the day anyway, you should be perfectly fine. And with a 5000 mAh battery, the battery life per charge on this phone is going to be so good that chances are you might not really need to charge it that much anyway. So if you are in that kind of situation where the battery is a bit more important to you, then I do think this phone will still be a great choice. And then down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with a phone like this that has a really large battery compared to one that has a much smaller battery, it will last for quite a bit longer. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a while without having to replace it, then this phone will be a great choice for you. Now for the software with this phone, we are getting Android 13, so not bad, but at the same time, considering at this point we are pretty much moving to Android 14, it's still not the best, and when it comes to Motorola, I feel like updates are kind of unpredictable. I mean, I was hoping this phone would get Android 13 like 6 months ago. So if you are someone who really likes to be up to date when it comes to software, this is probably not going to be the best phone for you, considering something like a Samsung or a Google phone is going to get 4 years of updates, whereas with Motorola, they typically get at least one, but again, they can be unpredictable, so if the software is really that important to you, you probably will want to get something else. But I feel like for the average user, having Android 14 may or may not be that important, so if you're not too concerned about the software, then it should be fine, considering at this point, Android 13 is definitely still not outdated. When it comes to other features, obviously as the name implies, the Stylus 5G does in fact have a stylus, real easy to get in and out, so definitely nice. And when it comes to actually using it, in my opinion, I would say it's pretty good. I mean, it's not the most responsive stylus out there, but considering this is like a originally $500, now probably like $300 or less phone, you can really only expect so much. So if you want to do any actual art, then you will want to get something much higher end. But if you're just trying to do stuff like taking handwritten notes or navigating through your display and stuff like that, then I do think for what it is, it does get the job done just fine. In addition to this, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 does also have NFC, making it one of the few Moto G phones that does. So if you like to use tap and pay, then keep in mind with this phone, you can do that no problem. But in conclusion, is the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 still worth buying in late 2023? I would definitely say yes. To be perfectly honest, this is really one of the few phones I have no complaints about. I mean, for what it is, this device is nearly perfect. The only big drawback here is that unfortunately, again, we are only getting Android 13, which a couple months ago wouldn't be such a bad thing, but considering again we are moving into Android 14 now, since this phone really only just got Android 13, I'm not expecting it to get Android 14 anytime soon, if ever. So if the software is really important to you, then again, keep this in mind because you will probably want to get something else. But aside from this, I mean, we're getting a great display here, plenty of storage, a really nice camera, a decently fast processor, a great battery, and then features like a stylus and NFC. And to make things even better, despite being maybe a little expensive for what it was when it first came out, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is quite a bit more affordable now. So in general, if you are looking for an affordable 5G phone, then even in late 2023, I do think the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is definitely still worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.